Fáið ykkur sæti, komið ykkur fyrir. Góða kvöldi, kæru gestir. Verið hjartanlega velkomin á Talk Series í kvöld. Ég ætla að skipta yfir í ensku. Welcome, dear guests. My name is Sunna Ástursdóttir, and I am the head of exhibitions and public programming here at the Reykjavík Art Museum. And I have the honor of welcoming you, dear guests, to this Talk Series event, and to present our next guest and the speaker of the evening, Andrea Lissoni. Talk Series has taken place since 2007, and the series is a collaboration between the Icelandic Art Center, Iceland University of the Arts, and Reykjavík Art Museum. Talk Series welcomes theorists, artists, and curators for a swift visit to Iceland, where our visitors visit the art school, get to know the art scene through visits to institutions, and art studios and exhibitions. And then they give a public talk, like the one that we will listen to here tonight. And on that occasion, I'd like to thank the Goethe Institute for supporting Andrea's visit. And the timing for this visit fits well, as Andrea is here with a colleague as well, taking in Steina's exhibition here during the last days of installation. This major exhibition that opens on Saturday here at the Reykjavík Art Museum and at the National Gallery on Saturday. And it is a pleasure to reveal tonight that in June next year, Andrea will host an exhibition of works by Steina at Haus der Kunst. So, to introduce Andrea and the content of your talk here tonight. Andrea's curatorial program is based on transdisciplinary and transgenerational approaches in which all strands of artistic practices are deeply connected. This is a focus he employs at Kunsthaus, where he has been the director since 2020. And since 2022, Haus der Kunst has been in a fast process of motion and transformation. They dedicate their work to living artists, proposing new lines in art history, questioning the previous canon, stereotypes, and rhetorics, with an outlook into the future. The program is based on assumptions that everything is program, without hierarchies between departments. As the main operational tool, the program explicitly interlinks all projects to form a common learning and engagement thread evolving throughout the years and fostering a new context that develops with a strong understanding of the increasingly digitalized world in which we live. So, we are excited to hear Andrea's talk, after which we will welcome questions and comments. And we have also our art bar open on the second floor. It's open now and will be also after the talk, so there will be also time for a bit more informal conversations. Welcome, Andrea Lissoni.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Sunna, for the wonderful introduction. I have only now to go through the words you shared through what I'm going to show. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Audur, for making this fantastic program. And some of you I am familiar with. We work together, and it's wonderful to see you here. Some of you I saw this afternoon in the Academy, and we also have the incredible honor to have Steina in our corner, so I'm particularly touched and happy to be here. I should confess, every time I come to Iceland, I feel welcome as nowhere else. It's really special, very special group of person, and you love art, particularly the art that we care more in a special way. So I begin with this journey. It's maybe too many images, but we try to begin from this image, which is what is Haus der Kunst. And we start from an image that is very different from the usual one that I will show you later. This is the image as I wanted to share Haus der Kunst in places like this, in other museums or with fellows or with public that is not necessarily aware of what it is. I wanted to imagine Haus der Kunst being seen by birds. I wanted to imagine Haus der Kunst being seen by someone flying, by someone that is not anymore with us. And by seeing this way, you see either a big smile in a field, or you see a sort of philharmonica, an instrument you can play, or you see, more importantly, a building, a large building that is in a park. In fact, the building is the door between the town and the park, as you can see. And the park is the biggest public park, urban public park in the world. And from this image, we start this sort of journey. And I start with this funny hello, which is something I composed for you with a work by Hito Barrada that we are showing in this moment. And I like to show also how we engage with the arts in a way that we try to be as much as possible friendly and based on different way of learning. The story we start from is not so friendly, in fact, and not perhaps everyone knows that the building opened in 1937 under the direction, the willingness of Adolf Hitler in person, who wanted that Haus der Kunst will become the most and unique instrument of propaganda, of art propaganda. And so was. In fact, the show that probably all you know, the Entartete Kunst, the Degenerate Art, was organized by the same team that was running Haus der Kunst, that back then was called Haus der Deutsche Kunst, opposite to Haus der Kunst, where today, by coincidence, the institution Kunstverein München is. So the story is known more for another show that was a groundbreaking show in art history, but the story is somehow catastrophic and sad. At the end of Second World War in 1945, the building changes, property. It's run by the Americans as a tool of soft power, and a series of exhibitions are shown. Particularly what is shown is the collection of the Pinacoteca that has been bombed, and obviously the collection has been saved, and the building becomes a site for showing local treasure, for instance, the collection of Blaue Reiter. And at some point in beginning this new path, it shows also masterpieces, like in 1955, Guernica by Picasso. It becomes a sort of site until a later phase, until the 90s, becomes a big exhibition house, like a Kunsthalle, enormous Kunsthalle, where art from the avant-garde, particularly from the American avant-garde, neo-avant-garde, is shown. You can imagine any name has been shown, de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Andy Warhol, Bob Rauschenberg, and it's actually all men. And this went on till 1992, when the institution became a foundation. The first director was appointed, and until the beginning of the 2000, it had a very, let's say, special program in which exhibitions were conceived transhistorically, putting together works maybe of antiquity and modernity. It was quite brilliant. It was a big moment of engagement for Haus der Kunst. What happened eventually between 2003 and 2018, the institution became a little bit the place of another idea of art, an idea of art that was very spectacular, very avant-gardistic, very cutting edge. Was run before by Chris Dercon, and you see intervention on the building by Paul McCarthy, and then afterwards by Okvi Envenzor, who moved Haus der Kunst in the direction of being perhaps a sort of major voice for what is known as the thinking on post-coloniality and the colonialism and the colonization. What happened, though, is that unfortunately, for reasons related to the health of Okvi Envenzor, also to his enormous commitment to bring his major exhibition all over the world, the Haus der Kunst has somehow been cut a little bit out from the rest of the, let's say, society in Munich. And has become a little bit isolated. Plus, unfortunately, the director passing away in 2018, actually 2019, generated a form of huge trauma for the art community, but also for those that were working there. I arrived in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and I was somehow trusted to bring the institution to a different stage, a completely different stage, keeping the roots of being on the edge, but becoming something else. And I will try how to share with you how we made it. This is the first, literally the first action we did. There was a show by Franz Walter, and we asked Franz to conceive a sort of short poem about the perception of bodies that we will project throughout the whole time of 40 days from when the second lockdown started on the building. But also, we squatted completely the website, and the website was only showing, as you can see on the right side, only see the sequence of words that were projected on the building at night throughout the day. To show a little bit how we intend the public space, I show you another project that happened at the same moment during the pandemic, and was a project made with an artist who is very important in the local community. His name is Olaf Nicolai. We work in a monumental building, but I have a very specific thinking about monuments, and I think monuments are no longer those that you can see over there with someone in marble or in copper or in metal, often a man riding a horse, but in fact monuments are what we know are since 5-7 years, since the idea of monument has been dramatically transformed, and the site where the monument is more relevant than the actual monument. Actually, the monument becomes a site of transformation, a site of horizontality, a site of encounter, and a site that is open to keep changing. So in this monumental building, I thought, why not stressing the idea what a monument is, no? And why we are not going to be a monument. So I invited Olaf to show a film called Marx, which shows 24 hours in a row the statue of Marx in Chemnitz, which is called Karl Marx Stadt, during the DDR era, which is the town where Olaf Nicolai comes from. And we organized screening across 14 different venues all over the world in different time zones, so that you will have this sort of permanent monument seen during the pandemic time by very few people. In some places there were almost nobody, in some it was packed, and they will overnight, during the day, seeing this unfolding of a not real time, it's a proper film, from the beginning of a day to the end of the day, the face of Marx, which obviously has very much to do with labor and a specific idea of time, but with a sound taken in real time by the of the site. So street vendors, skaters, and kids playing, or like funky people at night, and so on. This was a little gesture to move a little bit the idea of Haus der Kunst. The second gesture was Mel Bochner had a show in Haus der Kunst in 2016, and he produced a big writing that you can see that was shown on the front. On the front you cannot really see what is hanging because there are high trees. So this beautiful writing, which is a sequence of insults, literally insults in a language that doesn't exist, or it's not spoken so much anymore, which is the language, the secret language, the underground language that the Jewish community was using to communicate. The sequence of very violent insults were on the building. So I found, by coincidence, in the basement of the building, still kept this work divided. And I asked Mel if it was possible to hang it on the back, but actually in the place where the most people were passing in the time of the pandemic in the park, to become a very visible position about the building, but about how one can have fun in relation to a building. And Mel was extremely happy, and he agreed to donate the work. So the work is now there permanently, and is a sort of iconic gesture that the building has, and the building speaks about its own history, but also how, so to say, the idea of public space is for us important, and the idea of taking over the public space and graffiting the public space and having a direct, let's say, approach to the public space. This we continued by inviting Tony Cox, who had a solo show in the bunker, I will speak about the bunker later, to prepare banners that we presented in a underpass between the site, the Kunstverein I was mentioning beforehand, and Haus der Kunst, with these banners he produced, and on the facade of the American consulate that, not by chance, is attached to Haus der Kunst, is being built there after Second World War as a sort of controlling, let's say, institution that controlled the institution that went rogue and in the wrong way. But the idea is always to have signs around the building that make the building talking in a different way and generate awareness of the public space when it's taken by the art. So we continued, for instance, with John Jonas. We decided to install a screen that was up for almost 2 years at the entrance of the building, and now it became something else. And we commissioned a work to Ricky Tiravanij, which it was part of a sort of a strange retrospective with this banner hanging. It says, "My body is filled with waiting." And the idea was that the building is saying this, now expressing this thought, that the body of the building is waiting for something. And what the question is what we show now. What I would like to show now, like just a glimpse, is what we have in this moment, in this process of taking over the spaces around the building. We commissioned artist Koo Young Ha to conceive a sculpture, a skatable sculpture that is connected directly to the outside, to the east, let's say, side of the building, in dialogue with whomever has been. Some of you have been in Munich. Next to Haus der Kunst is a canal that is one of the most important hotspots for surfers in Europe. And so we have this huge community of surfers, enormous community of surfers, but also enormous community of viewers of surfers, because obviously a touristic attraction that is somehow there, and it's trying and surfing. So we decided, why don't we connect to another community, which is the community of the skaters that used that site in the 90s as a site to begin a new form of let's say, of fun, but also a new form of new sport that just arrived in Munich and started in that place. So we did, and that's somehow a little example of how we try to connect specific community, let's call them formerly known as underground community. So the public space and the way of how we work with the public space is perhaps one of the first columns of the program that we consider being part of everything. As Suna was saying, everything is program. The second column is a very strong, in our opinion, music and sound program that is called Tune. It happens monthly. It consists in residencies of artists or musicians that work with, artists work with sound or musicians that are very close to the arts. That is announced a year before. That is basically conceived on the one hand to give weight, credibility, and strength to the practice of sound and music within the museum, not by inviting a person making a gig, but by inviting a person or a collective to show their practice, maybe 2 concerts, a listening session, always a conversation, perhaps a screening, perhaps a performance if they made a performance. So to give this idea of, let's say, completeness of the practice of fundamental figures that are always on the borders, and perhaps considered like entertainers, now perhaps considered to be brought into the art for gigs. Whilst we want to give weight, and why did we go for music? And this is connected to the research that I made before moving to Munich. Because Munich has a specific soul connected to the history of music from very long time ago, starting from the 70s, from Giorgio Moroder and Donna Summer, that were actually literally performing where in the building where we are, but also throughout the 80s, they more and more took shape this fundamental jazz in avant jazz and free composition label called ACM, which is perhaps one of the most important labels in the world in that specific genre. In the late 90s, electronic music, let's say, stream was born in Munich around the etiquetta called Gomma, and perhaps someone of you knows the DJ called DJ Hell, and so on and so forth. But there was no place, there was no site. There were clubs, but there was no specific site where you could associate this culture. So I thought the roots are there. the curiosity could be there, the community could be there. Let's try to awaken it. And so was born Tune as a sort of second column of our program, in which everything, as I was saying, as Sona was saying, is so as relevant as an exhibition. So there is no hierarchy between exhibitions and Tune and other form of public program, let's call them as such. Some images of how Tune works. This is Lamin Fofana, this is Nkisi. This is a project that came a long time ago. We have a room where we can present, we can host about 1,000 people. So depending on the scale, we can have either big, let's say, events or very small and reduced. We also have, and this is part of the whole project, we also have a space which is an in-between space, which is empty, it's a transitional space, in which twice a year we commission an artist to take over through sound, with anything else but sound, that space, in order to bring the culture of sound within the museum, to bring this new voice within the museum, but also in order to somehow bring in other voices that we wouldn't represent through exhibitions. So through Lamin Fofana, we could keep continuing speaking about forms of post-coloniality through music and sound. Through Hiko Okuniev, we could speak about the catastrophe of the invasion of Ukraine, and he is a musician, musician working on site, still engaged. On the other hand, this is also a tentative of dealing with this very well-known, the legacy of this very well-known record, but also way of thinking by Brian Eno, which is music for ambience. What can be the music? How art can become a space, an environment, and how this can be transformative, even if you listen to it with the back of our ears. No? The idea of interconnecting everything starts from 2022. I mean, starts from before, but I can make some examples. So, and one of the examples, by the way, the space you see here on this side is the Ayawane, the public sculpture by Kuyung Hayes. One of the examples is how did we connect a stream in art history. This is Fujiko Nakaya. This was the first retrospective ever she had. She's an artist known to work with fog, but in fact she's a fundamental video maker who worked with video between the late 60s and the early 80s. And by presenting a journey into her practice and also having fog in the actual museum, we decided that it was important to generate a sort of narration. And the narration we did by connecting her work to the work of Damtype, who had offered a retrospective at the same time. Damtype is a collective of theater, let's say radical theater performers working with sound also and moving images that has extinguished almost entirely due to AIDS in the late 90s and early 2000s. A couple of members have survived and they keep bringing over this legacy that was initiated in the late 80s. But they somehow considered from Japan the legacy of Fujiko Nakaya. So we connected two different moments, and they also considered the fathers of a certain idea of immersivity in media art, particularly in Japan. But this moment we connected to commission to Karsten Nicolai, who, known as a musician under the pseudonym Alva Noto, or known as an artist as Karsten Nicolai, would never have become an artist without being in Japan and knowing Fujiko Nakaya as a landscape gardener. So his life changed completely in the early 90s when he encountered the work of Fujiko Nakaya. This is a sort of strand. This is how we connect everything at the same time, or more or less at the same time, in different sites. But then we connect even more, and I will try to explain better. The third column we have in our institution that we decided to set as a column is the use of public space. We have a public space inside, which is a sort of, let's call it a small turbine hall. It's a space in between that connects the galleries to the entrance to the back where the music program I was telling you about is. So starting from the pandemic, we commission once or twice a year different projects that are focus on one preoccupation: how can we be together, and how can we make sure that everyone that gets into the gallery has the feeling of belonging to that place, to be to feeling welcome, and to be part of a sort of living or lively, better community, in which do not everyone recognize itself as being part of that community, but they feel in the situation of what we could call the Italian piazza, a place where you feel safe, and you also more or less know everyone who is there. But if someone is there you don't know, you feel potentially open to welcome them. So we commissioned very different project. This is a project by Christine Sukim. Actually, this is the first time she worked with video. We are kind of known to push artists in direction they're not necessarily embracing beforehand. This is Amit Zenati, who is an artist who passed away, unfortunately, who is an artist of Algerian origin who has been living in Munich for 40 years and whose work has never been seen before, perhaps has never been seen as an artist, in fact. We were very, very proud and happy to show this work. This is a project by Martino Gamper. He conceived about 120 chairs that were scattered throughout the site, our middle hall, produced in Munich, playing with the tradition of Baroque somehow in Munich, but also generating objects that could be moved around the whole time. And in generating the sort of campaign we made to announce this project, as you can see, once again, we played with the surface, connecting inside and outside. Whilst this is the project we have at the moment, which is a project by A. Arakawa Nash, and it's part of a group show called For Children. It is connected to the artwork by Ku Yung Ha I was mentioning. So somehow we take over the public space in two different ways, in very, very different ways, and I can happily explain better how when I would be going through this avalanche of images. What is this? Just in a word, this is a sort of homage to Gutai, particularly to the moment when in 1956 in the Oisha Park in Japan, the collective Gutai, in particular one artist, decided to give agency to the generation to come, to children, to draw freely. The work is in fact called Mega Play Freely Please. And to draw freely, why children? Because the generation that preceded has failed in a terrifying way from every point of view, because the atomic bomb were dropped and everything went in the worst possible way. So the idea was to look forward with a new approach, with a new form of creativity, and also with a hope in the new generation, the generation to come. And that's a little bit a statement for us, because we are in this moment, which is a very challenging moment for not only for the arts, mostly for the society. We invest as much as we can in the generation to come, and that's why we wanted this project to be there. To show some other form of intertwinements, this is a survey show by John Jonas. We have different kind of size of galleries. Of course, you struggle to see the size. This where John Jonas is, or Fujiko Nakaya was, is quite big. It's more than 2,000 square meters, and divided in different rooms. The other one where for instance, Dam Type was in the size of 600 to 800 meters. So just to have an idea. John obviously performed. We are very, very much keen on liveness. So we presented two different performances of John that were rehearsed and prepared in Munich. Similarly, in the way we try to challenge the way we make exhibition, we worked with Rikrit Tirvanij in presenting not only an opera, but also a show in which we call it Scattered Show. The show was everywhere in the building, but was not really a show. There were a survey of all his films. There were single interventions, some I show you. There was a tea ceremony we presented. There were ping pong tables with the philosophy of looking at Rikrit as one of the few that really changed radically the way of working on engagement. Then comes the fourth column of our program, our vision, which is the bunker. And the bunker, some of you are familiar with. In the bunker, we present artists that artists working with media, always and only, that face reality in a different way, that want to tell other histories, that do not necessarily come from the center, and they try to strive as much as they can for transforming through arts the reality they live within. So the first artist we've shown and already mentioned is Tony Cox, who had in our bunker the first survey ever. We're also very well known to work on a different way of displaying. And we are very much keen on displaying, thinking about the body and not thinking about the eyes. Thinking about listening, feeling, and bodily perception. Thinking about all our visitors being octopuses rather than humans, and trying to not to overwhelm but to engage all senses. So in fact, as you can see, the light was blue because the bunker being underground, and Tony loving so much electronic music, we somehow generated a sort of club, a long classic techno Berlino club that was presenting throughout the array of 20 rooms a survey of all the video works he made. Following Tony came Carabin Film Collective, which is a collective of indigenous artists based in north of Australia that also presented a survey of their work, and so on and so forth. And then I will go back to who came to the bunker eventually. In a sort of line in showing artists that work with media that are fundamental, that change history, we have been working with John Jonas, Fujiko Nakaya, Meredith Monk, Lillian Lin, Catherine Ladik, and artists that are a little bit on the edge, perhaps, whose work is not seen yet, but becomes fundamental for us. That's why we put them somehow in the center of our program. A fifth column was, and now it's clear because the reason why I call them column, is how we worked on the language, on our, let's say, design. And at some point, it will be perhaps clear that our design comes from, and our icons comes from the amount of columns that are in front of the building, Happy 23 because we made in 23, that bind and then generate this sort of rainbow, in which the fundamental colors are the colors of the site. This sort of pink is the one that contains them all. But the idea was to find a language that, a sort of writing, a font that on the one hand looks familiar, on the other hand doesn't, in which everything goes close, in which the words get close to each other, because we want to intertwine, we want to connect the arts as much as we can, but also in which the fact that you don't really read doesn't matter. Because anyway, when I arrived, everyone, I was working with the previous generation of, let's say, colleagues, were very upset by the fact that the name we were presenting were not known. Everyone I mentioned are not like the classic blockbuster names. So I pushed by saying, okay, you know what, let's work on this, because in fact, who cares if you don't know necessarily the name? In fact, what counts is the art, and the name will come together. So let's look on a language. It's a language that's sort of alien, and it's kind of antique, but futuristic. Alien in the sense that we are talking about something new and something different. So although the roots are the same, let's try to push this. And that's why also for Tune, we decided to have a separate, different design, which is very specific and is a sonic-inspired design. And now you can see on the left what that screen became. The screen of John Jonas became somehow the icon or the host of our icon. To continue a little bit more quicker, once every 3 years, more or less, when the time of research is done, we have the opportunity to work on a group show. We are not a huge team, and we need to research as much as we can. So the show, of which there are 3 images now, that is opened 2 weeks ago in Hong Kong in the Museum M+. It's called Inside of the Spaces, and it's a survey of environments, which is the word that comes before the word installation, that then faded out in the 70s, made by women artists between 56 and 76. These are all works that we reconstructed. Most of them haven't been seen since when they were presented. And I'm not saying anything now about environments, otherwise it becomes a PhD lecture. But it's a show that we wanted to present because we were very keen on showing that the idea of an environment, which will be experienced for sure with the work of Steiner, is something that is nothing new, has roots that go back to 40, 50 years ago, has leaped out from art history, but it's fundamental to think about what we are in this moment, to what are we plugged in, which kind of multiverse we are part of, but also how art can be different, perhaps ephemeral, at the same time extremely engaging. And engaging is the word, because in that strand that started with the environment, we also started really working hardcore with engagement and learning, and that what Sona was saying, we have exhibitions, and we have now many exhibitions that we presented in the last 2 years, in which we have perhaps 5 curators, 2 are public program, let's call them as such, we call it learning and engagement, colleagues, and 2 of them or 3 of them are actual curators. So we really work together in the most radical way. And for us, Maus, which is in German means mouse, of course, is a game, it's a wordplay about the house becoming a mouse, or the site for mouses. It's a major festival moment, so to call, very structure made for children that happens every year at the beginning of May. Of course, you must have noticed that, and it's perhaps the last column, that let's call it digitality, or form of relation to media, is for us a major preoccupation. You must have noticed that you didn't see painting, you didn't see sculpture. We tend not to ship. When we ship only from one place. Normally it's either the studio of the artist or a foundation. But in general, we produce on site, or we work with media. And let's say this digital or media line, or media archaeology becoming digital line, is for us very important. And that's also why we are very proud to present a show of Steiner. And it's fundamental to talk about the present, but also to talk how arts can be seen from different perspectives, not only transnational and transgenerational, but also transdisciplinary. So we put together a show in which Wang Shui work we produced by a relatively young, emergent American with a Chinese background artist, was in dialogue with a work, with a survey of Rebecca Horn. So it's somehow putting in dialogue the era of mechanics and the transformation of the body, the idea of when the body becomes hit by illness, which was the case of when Rebecca Horn started working, and needs to transform, needs to support it by prostheses, and these prostheses become part of a whole imaginary of works that actually we decided to show, and we gave so maximum room and visibility to the films Rebecca Horn made between the 70s and the 72 and 74, 75, as the heart of, or the brain of her practice. But this was in dialogue with Wang Shui in order to show to the public that stories are never new, but there's always beautiful red thread that need and can be true. Alongside this, we also, and this is a little example of a performance we presented that has to do with body and corporality. It's called Alessio by Italian artist Nico Vascellari, that engages with the story of a person who is affected by severe autism, and we somehow try also to open as much as possible the understanding of the society as an open site in which everyone and the institution, everyone is welcome. So we have a line also in which we welcome as much as possible projects that have to do with mental health or form of well-being. But continuing the media discourse, I go back to the bunker, and that's where some of our friends here in the room are involved, following a series of very beautiful and touching phone calls that came from Ragnar Kjartansson already in 2022 about he being convinced that we were the best site, the best institution to present a project he was working on after leaving Russia, survey show he had. Finally, we came with enthusiasm to the possibility to host a retrospective of Pussy Riot, Velvet Terrorism, exactly in that bunker. And the curator is also here with us, Lydia. And the show obviously has been fantastic for us because it has embodied perfectly what we want to say when we speak about not only the site, the bunker of a site of counter-history, but also what is a monument and how monument can change and how a monumental building can be a talking monument that speaks many languages, has also political positions, but in fact supporting art. Of course, you have noticed there is always a sort of graffiti-alike line that we like to keep present, which doesn't necessarily have to do with the art of graffiti, but has to do more with the idea of understanding that everyone who has been out in the street, maybe making graffiti, maybe dancing, breakdance, or maybe just like taking pictures, has of what public space is, no? And how, or skating, how public space functions. So the show was more or less the one that was here, upgraded to 1.5 years after, and was extremely well received, extremely touching. We extended the show until June, and it's been a wonderful journey. So you see now the old date. In fact, we extended till June. To finish the sort of digital line I was talking about, last year we had presented a survey show of Philippe Parenot that was born as a survey show, but never became a survey show because every work in the show was new. There was nothing that, beside one film, that has been seen before. So that's to reinforce the fact that when we work with artists, we try to bring them in places they were not before. This is always a sort of critical moment, but it's beautiful for us and for the artists as well. We do this also with younger artists, and I'll show you the images feng shui. But in particular, we have a format that we call live exhibition that happens, and it's beautiful. There's a museum here in town that has to do with liveness. That is an exhibition, we call it an exhibition, but lasts 2 weeks from this year, in which we support the younger generation working with media, particularly, but also with the body. So it combines music, sound practices, and media practices, and it's quite special. It's at the end of January, and it's a moment that is somehow the moment in which we take some themes that are strong in our media thinking, and not only media thinking, art thinking, and we test them with the younger artists, and then we perhaps see them unfolding throughout the year or throughout the years. No? Never ever illustrating. We never make show about subject matters. We just try to make shows about how to look differently at some aspect, and therefore also the titles are not about something, but are about the artist we show. In this media line, the last survey show we had was the one of Shuli Chang that closed recently. Shuli Chang is a sort of media pioneer, video pioneer, who started also in the early 70s and then evolved her practice until the point of working with AI that has recombined all her works in galleries, presenting a show that was seen as a long environments of different moments in her career. That, as you can see from the destroyed car, once again, there's a sort of punk line that we love supporting, and also punk kind of graffiti line, and also remembering and recalling to our public. So by saying that everything is programmed, and by saying that we believe that our public is made of animals more than only humans reading, obviously, as you can see, we try to work on what for us is the most important. We are convinced that the body keeps the score, and the bodies of our public keep the score, and by coming back, they will remember what was there before. And you can also probably begin to tease what will come after. So we never work on disrupting this line of memories on the other way around. We try to push it forward. And this line of memories then shapes the way we choose, but also the way we display. And the way we work on one show being, for instance, dark, the following one being lit, and using some devices like a carpet that will stay for 2-3 shows in a row. Like simple, let's say, curatorial devices that enable to get back and connect. You know? Mostly thinking about the fact that our public, despite being an international institution, is local, and people will inevitably come back 2, 3, perhaps 4 times or more throughout the year. So this is the space that I show you beforehand, before being taken over by children. And now it's been taken over by children. Today it's probably far different from how you see it now. This is the show called For Children, the second group show that we managed to do, and was idea, and it's on now. Was idea is very simple, and I really can tell you where it comes from. It comes from you must have gotten the fact that I'm very much into forms that are ephemeral and that are connected to liveness and media. So for me, Harun Farocki was a fundamental figure. And in various moments in my previous life, I worked with him, and also I got to know him better. And there was this series he made with his own daughters in the mid-70s, specifically addressing them and making short films, 3-minute film for them, intended to be for children, to be shown in TV. Obviously, it was Harun Farocki. Therefore, the films are about infrastructure, about bridges, airports, cars, and let's say water connection, canals, highways, and so on. But the main scene is always the two daughters in a bed talking about falling perhaps asleep, about to fall asleep, starting a story, and then navigating into the world of Harun Farocki, falling finally asleep within 3 minutes. No? So from this little thing that I encountered more than 10 years ago that has never been seen, the question came, but what happens when an artist makes a work explicitly for a child? Isn't it interesting to look at art history from the perspective that the fact that so many artists must have made works for children all over the world. So beside the intention, perhaps is there any form of continuity across continents or across practices? Wouldn't be interesting to look at this. And instead of starting from the modernity, which is filled with artists who made works for children, but more in the dimension of toys, particularly in Second World War, when the size had to be reduced. We looked at the moment that started in 1968 with a reason that has very much to do with the history of Munich that I'm not telling you now necessarily. So looking from 68 to nowadays, explicitly to works made for children, to works explicitly made for children, we asked everyone, no? John Jonas, her first work ever as an installation she made for children. In fact, it's called The Juniper Tree, was a performance for children that then became an installation, which is now in the collection of Tate. Meredith Monk has made plenty lullabies dedicated to children as portraits of children, and so on and so forth. You can think about how many you can, and you will find for sure artists have made work for children. So we put them all together. We made a long research that turned out not being exhaustive, because you need really to have many institutions collaborating with you. And what you see now is what you will be able to see until the end of May, if you ever come to Munich, is images of the show, and artists that have been working for children consistently have been invited. Among them, Ito Barada, Eva Kotkakova, you can see in these two images, but also Agus Malpto, who was at the last Documenta. This is a new production. Actually, it's the only new production in the show. All other works were existing, and many other ones now. Tromarama, a collective from Indonesia, Rachel Rose, Emily Floyd, this, Ernesto Neto, this is a work of 2006, Olafur Eliasson, the very well-known work with the Lego blocks that he made in 2004 after the Turbine Hall Commission, and so on. So we are about also to open a new final, let's say, strand of the year, that we open with a show of Cyprien Gaillard that we presents at the center a film that we co-produced that is shot in partially in Munich in this moment of the year 2 years ago, within the context of the Oktoberfest, and has to do with monuments once again. So Cyprien, for whom knows his practice, is someone who comes from graffiti, in fact, and has been committing to the culture of the street extensively and continuously. And this film is a sort of homage to how monuments are in public space but not seeing, and how vernacular, weird, and bizarre they can be, and how they are with us. In fact, is a 3D film in which, when you enter the space and you face the film, you can do anything else that moving around and moving and adjusting yourself, and your body starts moving because the objects are floating in front of you but with you. There will be other works that are part of this, but transdisciplinary is somehow the last secret statement that we don't share necessarily with our public about how we try to take the building, shaking it and making speaking in a different way about what monuments are. And why I'm using the word monuments, not only because the building is monumental, but because for us, let's say the commitment that we have as an institution that is public is 100% for our public. And engaging with the public is the basis of our work. Engaging doesn't mean educating, means like offering that site I was telling you about, but also offering the possibility of encountering art as a form that transforms your understanding or questions your understanding and your senses. And last but not least, makes you aware of the fact that a monument doesn't need to be that thing in the middle, but it's an encounter that transforms you in different ways. And alongside this, I was mentioning artists that we work with, that we ship everything from their place. Everything that comes from the studio of Sandra Vázquez de la Horra is going to be shown in a show that opens mid of November. And in this case, is someone who works with drawings, and a different way of drawing, but had an important body of work of video that she presented in the early, she never presented, in fact, that she realized in the early 90s, an artist that was born under the dictatorship of Pinochet in Chile, that left the country, that lived in Germany for more than 40 years, that has never had a show, and is extraordinary. His work is obviously impregnated by indigenous thinking, by a certain idea of, let's say, surrealism, as it can be seen from that perspective, but particularly by an idea of drawing with freedom and quality, but also commitment. It's absolutely original, in which every drawing becomes a sculpture somehow, a mega leporello, but also an homage to how the body can be represented differently, and it's a site. And once again, obviously, if you think about the image of the floor being graffitied daily by children, and the show the same children will be encountering upstairs, our hope is that the children will be thinking, oh, I can do something differently, no? Oh, this drawing I did could have been made in a different way. No? And that's, if this message goes through, we are already happy, and then art will come, or the learning of art will come when we'll be a little bit more older. So I think we are at the end. I think I also somehow respected the time, if I'm not wrong. So yes, good. So maybe we can go with whatever question you have. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you, Andrea. We have time for some questions or comments or any thoughts. Yeah. I'm going to hand you the microphone so that you can speak into it for the filming.
Thank you for the talk. I'm curious, you mentioned a couple times that you like to influence the direction of the artists and push them into new media, and I'm curious what your, I find it very cool, by the way, but I'm curious what your reasoning for it is.
The reasoning is, on the one hand, we really want to be connected to the form that are happening now. And from my observation of, from our observation of what are the forms that come from the artists that are younger, that we think are the most interesting, the most pushing forward, the most, let's say, bringing the discourse of art on the other side, we cannot help but acknowledge these are mostly happening with media and shift across different practices. So by looking at the practices that we think are the most, let's say, challenging, perhaps not understood, but interesting, and looking at the past, at the back, we came to the conclusion this needs to be at the center. There's another reason that is obviously very local. Munich is a town that has a high amount of IT or high-tech infrastructure that is growing, skyrocketing. There's an incredible polytechnic school, really, really good. And the amount of, let's say, high-skilled migrants that moved to Munich in the last 5 years is extraordinary. So the landscape of, let's call them startups and unicorns and so on is very specific. There's a major investment on AI and particularly in the department of quantum studies. which somehow is followed by the academy. So the academy, in a beautiful way, the Art Academy has decided to hire a new generation of professors. Among them, in music, for instance, Florian Hecker, in photography, Armin Linke, in film, Julian Rosenfeld, in performance, Alexandra Pirici, and in media, Hito Style. So we have this presence of Hito Style and her way of working permanently in Munich that really is shaping already generation of young students. So all this somehow makes sense, no? So that's why an idea I had or a vision or a starting point to let's develop this line because it's not so much developed in museum and in artwork, makes sense for this town. It totally really makes sense, no? It wouldn't make sense in a town in Central Asia probably, but it makes definitely sense in Munich. Obviously, you see, it's not a media museum at all, media institution at all. We try always we have drawings at the same time, video game by Tromarama, so it's important to combine all the forms. And in fact, I use the word programming obsessively, because what we are trying to do is really we are programming the museum. No? We are really trying to program it, to program the institution as much as we can, as if we're programmer, no? Like in which everything makes sense for the public. But yes, the answer is a bit that.
Yeah, hi. I'm an Icelandic artist who lives a long time in Germany, and I noticed that voices from the north are underrepresented. It would be really interesting for us here to hear more how it came about that you want to show Vasulka. That's why you're putting on the Vasulka show. Steina.
Ah, yes. Well,
because it's not so common in Germany.
So there is as you have noticed, there's a running strand now. So there won't be a big surprise when the show will be opened, because the public will be familiar with this practice of artists that work with different media, some more electronic, some more mechanic, some more digital, particularly with this personality. So it won't be arriving as a surprise or as a trauma. Perhaps the most important is that it will be connected to something else. So the connection with other shows in the galleries will be helping, on the one hand, the visitor to see what sort of landscape it is, or what point of dots are connecting throughout different practices. On the other hand, what is our main interest is like trying to bring together this preoccupation for the dialogue between, let's use very old words, natural and artificial landscapes. No? The incredible artificial park we have outside, being totally artificial but supposedly natural, but also the media landscape being absolutely artificial, in reality being our natural world. No? So I think this question, which is a question, was a major preoccupation for the work of Steiner, is going to be clearly there. So there will be hopefully very much a representation of her interest into nature and how do we look at nature from a different perspective through that media, which is inherently unnatural. Sound and music will be a main question for us. I mean, Steiner has a background of being a violinist and a musician, so we would like to emphasize this as much as we can. But then we are at the beginning, in the sense that we are here mostly, and my colleagues are here mostly to learn how the works are together and how they can be woven together in a different way, in dialogue with the team that has organized the show. And that's a little bit the answer, no? And I can say that we're not so much, we don't build walls. We have a rule, we never build walls. So as you may have seen, no? So it will be a big challenge to see how we display the works without building rooms and walls. We try to use the one we have. And yes, and about the contextualization, I think we are in a good place, because only the fact that the love that was demonstrated by the work of John Jonas, which perhaps Reanimation, which is the work that she made for Documenta 2012-13, was somehow born in Iceland, thanks to Steiner very much, is really a beautiful line to connect now for a more skilled public. For a public that is our public, because we don't have an art public mostly. We have a public that is a very general public, like a normal, let's say, public. I guess that the works that deal with the perception of the body and how the body can change and can be represented differently through sound are going to be also very important. But as I say, I don't want to say something that I'm not doing. I'm just simply whispering, and my colleagues are going to make the best choices, no? I'm sure.
Yes. Anybody else? Yeah, Ariana?
Hi, I'm Ariana, so I'm a project manager of public programming and education here at Reykjavik Art Museum. And I was just curious to see, as you've moved to these more experimental and more public approaches in your programming, how has it been received by different groups of interest, like maybe by artists, by families and children, and by maybe the older clientele that was used to something else. Like, how has this been received, and has it been a good, positive experiences, or maybe a difficult one?
Thank you. It's a wonderful question, because it's been going very well, in a point that we are surprised by the amount of visitors we had last year. It's not about the quantity, but it's always reassuring to know that something so out of the box brings really, Munich is a medium-sized town, and last year we had something like 450,000 visitors. That for us is a lot. And among these visitors, more like 50%, particularly for our show, were under 18 years, no? Which is quite incredible also. So the different communities seem reacting in the best way. We are missing something, and that's why we invest, and we invest very much. So we had in the last year made some transformation that somehow brought us to a critical point of having a very light production team, a very extremely committed but light curatorial team, instead having invested like furiously in learning and engagement, meaning literally hiring persons. So we found strand of funds that enable us to hire 4 more people. One is community building, one is working on what we would call community of struggles, which are the community that will never come to the museum ever, in which the aim for us is, if we get 20 people, it's as relevant as you get 20,000, but we want these 20 to make it. It's an experiment, and let's see if it works. And then 2 more that are working on how to integrate digital tools in this. We are working, I didn't show this in any way, but we're also working a lot on, let's say, producing online material, like particularly on social media, and this is somehow also working quite well. So in general, the response is positive. The artist community is happy. This we see it from the feedback of the academy. Obviously, the town is always divided on what happens when, but we are very lucky because the 4 other institutions in town have very different programs. So when I arrived, I somehow decided to make something that was completing and not competing. So we have an institution, it's the Lambach House, that has a super strong program on the idea of groups, collective, and women artists, no? Coming from the Blue Rider. Then we have Brandhorst that works on the legacy of painting from America, Germany, towards nowadays, and trying to diversify. Then there is Kunstverein that works until now on cutting-edge practices, more conceptual-oriented. So within this landscape, we position something that makes sense for everyone, so we all reinforce ourselves and we do not compete. I think this is the main answer. It's hard to tell what is missing. I think, for instance, what is happening now with this show for children, it's a quote by Bruce Nauman, and the entire title, you read it now, and the work of Bruce Nauman is in the show also, we had an extraordinary amount of visitors, of families with children, in fact. But if perhaps what we are missing is missing the actual public that will come for the art, that got maybe surprised by a show that seems being for children, but in fact is not for children. The show is a sort of survey of the form of sculpture in the last 30 years. All possible, like participative, made with existing material, informed by surrealistic tradition, based on media, or like more interactive, and so it's really like a video, of course. No? It's really like a journey on what was sculpture in the last 30 years. But this message is not simple to get through, and perhaps what we're lacking now is the actual public of, let's say, art fan, art aficionados. So let's see how we can get them in. No? But yeah.
Thank you. I think we don't have time for more questions now. Thank you, Andrea Lissoni, for your talk. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.